Greetings, divine blessed loved ones. Just taking a moment to ground in with you. I just did my asana practice for the morning and drank some cacao today. Feeling really good. Feeling divinely open and guided. I also spent this morning reading scripture. I was reading the Yoga Sutras, which always really opens me up. So, feeling great for our share today. And if you're new here, I've been going live every single Tuesday for the past several months with a weekly yoga philosophy share from this book, the Yamas and Niyamas, Exploring Yoga's Ethical Practice by Deborah Adele. So if you'd like to see previous readings from this series, they're all posted on the Facebook page, Live It to Yogini. They're also on my YouTube channel at Live It to Yogini. And if you'd like to join us for future broadcasts, again, we're live every single Tuesday at 11 a.m. PST, 2 p.m. EST. And if my content resonates with you today, I'd really appreciate you giving me a like, commenting. I'd love to hear your experience. Subscribe to me, share with a friend who you feel might be interested. So again, reading from this book, the Yamas and Niyamas. Now, what are the Yamas and Niyamas? They're an excellent jumping off point for anyone who's new to yoga philosophy, and I always love to share So they facilitate taking ownership of your life and directing it towards the fulfillment that you seek. So again, if you haven't seen any of the previous videos, I encourage you to go back and check those out on the page. Today we are starting with Satya, which is the second of the Yamas. And so just going back to what the Yamas and Niyamas are, the first 5 jewels are referred to as yamas, a Sanskrit word which translates literally into the word restraints and includes nonviolence, truthfulness, non-stealing, non-excess, and non-possessiveness. And then the niyamas, the last 5 jewels, are referred to as the observances. They include purity, contentment, self-discipline, self-study, and surrender. So these are basically a set of guidelines or tenets, yogic philosophy, to live your life. And the first 5 tenets, the yamas, again, they can be translated into the restraints, and their actions to be restrained in order to attain inner peace. So how we interact with the external world and people outside of us. And then the niyamas, the next 5 tenets, are translated to observances, so behaviors, actions to be cultivated in order to attain inner peace, and they relate more to our internal experience and how we interact with ourselves. So, like I said, today we are on Satya, which is truthfulness. The last 2 videos we were covering ahimsa, the first yama, which translates to nonviolence, and it is said that if you can fully embody nonviolence, you are able to fully embody all of the yamas and niyamas. So Satya, truthfulness today, and we'll just read the first half of this chapter today. Perhaps you have read The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. This delightful series has certainly been a favorite in my family over the years. In a passage from the first book of the series, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, 4 children are about to be introduced to the mighty King Aslan by Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. Mr. Beaver lets them know that Aslan can right wrongs, banish sorrow, drive out winter, and bring spring to the land. When asked if Aslan is a man, Mr. Beaver sternly declares to the children that Aslan is definitely not a man. He is the king of beasts, and anyone who approaches him should go with their knees knocking. The children are afraid that Aslan isn't safe, and their fears are confirmed by Mr. Beaver. But he also assures them that although the king of beasts isn't safe, he is good. Like Aslan the Lion King, the jewel of Satya, or truthfulness, isn't safe, but it is good. Truth has the power to right wrongs and end sorrows. It is fierce in its demands and magnanimous in its offerings. It invites us to places we rarely frequent, and where we seldom know what the outcome will be. If we don't approach truth with our knees knocking, we haven't really understood the profoundness of this guideline. We may think that truth means simply not fibbing to our mom when she asks if we ate the forbidden cookie. But truth demands integrity to life and our own self that is more than not telling a simple lie. When we are real rather than nice, when we choose self-expression over self-indulgence, when we choose growth over the need to belong, and when we choose fluidity over rigidity, we begin to understand the deeper dynamics of truthfulness, and we begin to taste the freedom and goodness of this jewel. So this section is titled Be Real Rather Than Nice, embodying the second yama, the yogic principle of truthfulness. Carl Jung writes, "A lie would make no sense unless the truth was felt to be dangerous. Why do we lie? Are we afraid to hurt someone's feelings, or afraid that if we hold the truth, we would not be liked or admired anymore? I have a friend who says, I pick the right size box, put myself in it, wrap it up with pretty paper and a bow, and then present myself to the other person. I have another friend who states, I always show up differently with different people. My biggest fear is that everyone I know will be in the same room at the same time, and I won't know who to be." And then there is the whole topic of nice. I heard Yogi Rajachala say that you have to watch out for nice people. Being a nice person myself, I at first was offended and then confused, so I took this statement to heart and began pondering its truth. I began to see the distortion that sits between nice and real. Nice is an illusion, a cloak hiding lies. It is an imposed image of what one thinks they should be. It is a packaging of self in a presentable box, imposed by an outer authority. People who are nice hold truth inside until they reach a breaking point, and then they become dangerously inappropriate. I know because I used to be such a person. Real comes from the center of our unique essence and speaks to the moment from that center. Real has a boldness to it, an essence, a spontaneity. Real asks us to live from a place where there is nothing to defend and nothing to manage. It is a contact with the moment that is not superimposed or prepackaged. Real is something we might not always like in another, but we come to know there will be no surprises. Yeah, isn't that concept a little bit intimidating? I feel like, my roommate and I were talking about this last night. Just this feeling of sometimes people are really afraid to look at their own shadow aspects or flaws to the point where we're so good at lying to ourselves, and when we're lying to ourselves, we can't possibly be truthful with other people, you know what I'm saying? And when we have these insecurities, fears, or maybe something that has been consistently pointed out to us about ourselves that we don't like, and so every time someone points it out, we deflect and get defensive and angry, project all of our stories onto that thing, because that is like our insecurity, to the point where just something comes up and it's kind of like salt in the wound, every time that comes up again. So when we aren't able to be real with ourselves and be really honest and truthful with ourselves, it is doubly uncomfortable when others around us are real, even if that realness isn't actually directed at us. For example, the conversation my roommate and I were having is that we both feel we're very straightforward people. We value that quality even to a point of being blunt, and we're able to tell each other about ourselves, we both know that we are able to look at ourselves and genuinely receive feedback from each other. Even if that feedback might come off as harsh or critical, but it's like things that we already know about ourselves because we're self-reflective people, when you know something about yourself and you're not afraid to own your insecurity and say hey, I'm working on this, it isn't as much of a problem when other people point it out. And that's kind of the distinction between being real and being nice. So real is something we might not always like in another, but we come to know there will be no surprises because then there's not a pretense or no hiding, just being really upfront, and open. Real asks us to live from a place where there is nothing to defend and nothing to manage. It is a contact with the moment that is not superimposed or prepackaged. So authenticity, vulnerability, honesty. Real, though not always pleasant, is trustworthy. When I met my husband, I mistook him for a gay man. As a result, I didn't display myself as I normally would have if I thought there might be a chance for romance. I know now that the deepness we have in our relationship has been built from the foundation of that first experience of me showing him my real, authentic self, and he in return has given me the same gift of realness. What is driving you to distort yourself or silence yourself, or say yes when you mean no? Whereas Carl Jung would ask us, what is so dangerous in the moment about the truth that you are choosing to lie? There are questions that merit our pondering. What is so dangerous in the moment about the truth that you are choosing to lie? Self-expression versus self-indulgence. When we habitually silence and distort ourselves, when we aren't authentic, we begin to lose our lust for life and look towards other things to fulfill us. We forget that we are here on this earth to self-express in a way that no one else ever has or ever could. We can feel this urge within us wanting to bubble up and say to the world, I'm here. Our self-expression can find its way into the world in many forms, but when the process of our self-expression is imposed on for whatever reason, we can easily turn towards self-indulgence. Most often, this imposition comes in the forms of shoulds or should-nots, either from our own self-messages or from others' messages to us. The result is always a misdirection of energy. There is a settling for less than we had hoped for, a kind of resolution to things as they are. Often we find ourselves hiding by overeating or overworking, rather than doing what we really want to do. Living the life that cries to be lived from the depth of our being frees up a lot of energy and vitality. The juices flow. Everyone around us benefits from the aliveness that we feel. On the other hand, suppressing that life, for whatever reason, takes a lot of our life energy just in the managing of the pretending. Arthur Samuel Joseph, nationally known voice teacher and author of the book Vocal Power, Harnessing the Power Within, gives his first-time students an interesting assignment. He tells them to go home and record themselves reciting a poem and then singing a song. Then he tells them to take off all their clothes and repeat the exercise. Joseph says that when the student returns for their lesson and presents their homework, Joseph can always tell which recording was done naked, because the naked version is much more vibrant. In all the ways we package ourselves and protect ourselves, or when we choose the safety of belonging over the inner need to grow, we also dull ourselves. So when we make the choice that is comfortable, safe, it's in our comfort zone, we know that thing, we've been there before, or in a similar situation, we just have to ask ourselves, is this the decision that is going to be safe, or is this a decision that's going to help me grow? And that's, again, where that realness piece comes in, because we can kind of lie to ourselves. And like the ego self, the little self, wants to lie and tell us the story of like, no, you can't do that, because it wants to keep us small in our comfort zone. And that exists for a reason, that literally we evolved with an ego to keep our physical bodies safe, to keep us alive. But where the ego kind of steps out of bound is when it's doing that to a point where you are suffering from it, because you're never doing anything different, never getting out, of your comfort zone. And so many of us are willing to stay where it's comfortable and not necessarily fun or enjoyable, just because we're so afraid of the unknown. So in all the ways we package ourselves and protect ourselves, or when we choose safety of belonging over the inner need to grow, we also dull ourselves. The need to belong versus the need to grow. In the family constellation work of Bert Hellinger, therapeutic work dealing with family systems, a unique slant on guilt and innocence is expressed. Hellinger says that as human beings, we have both a need to belong to groups and a need to expand and grow. Hellinger says that as long as we stay within the approval of the group, we experience the innocence of belonging. However, when we begin to grow in directions beyond the group, we experience guilt in regards to the group. The truth of our freedom carries the price of guilt. That really resonates for me, just as someone who lives a really alternative lifestyle, you know, going against the grain of what the majority of people do, specifically people in the area where I grew up, but really in general it's kind of this, I'm going against the grain of the cultural narrative of, you know, go to college, get a job, get a house, get married, you know, family, that whole situation. And I have definitely experienced guilt because of it, which is odd to me. And I have questioned where this guilt comes from, because I love my life and I wouldn't change anything about it. I wouldn't trade a moment of my time. And yet there is this like feeling of discomfort of not belonging, you know, and it comes up as guilt and shame. So I'll read that again for my sake, and maybe there's someone who really needs to hear that as well. Let me know if you resonate. Hellinger says that as long as we stay within the approval of the group, we experience the innocence of belonging. However, when we begin to grow in directions beyond the group, we experience guilt in regards to the group. The truth of our freedom carries the price of guilt. So when we get too big for our boundaries and start to grow outside of our comfort zone, which is really a beautiful thing, but there's a lot of incentive not to do that, and it's because of this human need that we have to belong and fit in. I experienced this in my own life when I embraced feminism. Here's a good example. All that time, feminism was a refuge for me that gave voice to many of the experiences of my life. It just made sense to me that women were as important as men, and that there should be equality between the sexes. My mother was mortified because feminism went against everything she believed in. I couldn't have done anything more evil in her sight. I found myself feeling guilty in relationship to her and the love I felt for her, and yet I knew that for that time in my life, I was following a deep longing in my soul. Although our love for each other remained strong and intact, my choice around feminism remained a painful topic for both my mother and me. The groups we belong to are many. Our country, our culture, our gender, our class, our age group, our race, our religion, family of origin, our community, our workplace, and the various organizations that we are members of. All these groups have rules and belief systems, some written, some silently understood, that must be followed for us to be a part of the group. Before I go farther, I just remembered I wanted to show you guys this shirt I got, because we were just talking about feminism. The future is female. I just love this. So anyway, talking about the groups that we belong to in this human experience, so many different categories that we identify with, and we create these categories out of convenience, out of the need for love and belonging, out of, you know, just where we live. And we have a given family, the family that we're born into, or the people that raised us, if you're adopted, and then we're able to also have our chosen family, right? Another group or way that we can identify. All of these groups have rules and belief systems, some written, some silently understood, that must be followed for us to be part of the group. So there's always a trade-off, right? For someone like me, I value my freedom, and I prioritize my freedom to the extent that oftentimes when I am part of a group, I tend to rebel against the group. But I've also felt that need to, you know, fit in and follow whatever the belief system is or the rules in order to have that love and belonging. And it does feel so good when you have that as well. These rules and belief systems are necessary. They are what shape the group and give the group its identity. As long as these rules don't conflict with our inner longing to grow more and more into our full self, there is no problem. There it is. As long as these rules don't conflict with our inner longing to grow more and more into our full self, there is no problem. However, when a conflict arises between the need to belong and the need to grow, we have to make a choice. We must either sacrifice a part of ourselves to maintain our belonging, or we must risk the approval and support of the group by growing. Think of the protester whose conscience opposes a war her country is engaged in. This is so relevant for what's happening right now in the States with Black Lives Matter and all of the BIPOC causes. So think of the protester whose conscience opposes a war her country is engaged in. Following her realness, will she take a stance even if it means going to jail? Or think of the man who finds himself in a dead-end job that holds no interest or life for him, and yet he has a family to support with kids ready for college. Will he make the switch to a job that excites him but pays a significantly lower salary? Or the young mother who is longing to go back to school but is deeply entrenched in a family and community that demands that mothers stay home and care for their small children? Will she choose the realness of her longing, trusting she can care for her children even more deeply from a place of satisfaction and the excitement of her own life? In all of these situations, there is no right or wrong choice. Rather, these situations point out why listening to and acting on our inner voice to change and grow, to move on, to speak truth to ourselves and then act on it can be so difficult at times because of those trade-offs, right? Trading our freedom for familiarity or obligations, responsibilities. So many of us do have big responsibilities, family, children. It's huge. So if we pursued any of these stories in more depth, we would see that other factors can easily be pulled in as additional reasons to remain in the status quo, stacking the deck even more in favor of staying the same. I often hear people say, I just don't know what to do. I think more often than not, we do know what to do. The cost of our realness just seems too high at the time. So we know in our heart what we really want to do or what the real answer is, but again, the ego story that we tell ourselves to keep ourselves in our comfort zone, safe, in a place that we know we can handle because we've been there before, even if we truly want something that's a lot different. The cost of our realness just seems too high at the time. Truth rarely seems to ask the easier choice of us. In the moment-to-moment details of our daily living, truth asks us to pay attention and to act correctly the first time. Okay, y'all, so that is the first half of this chapter on Satya, truthfulness, and at the end of every chapter, the author always shares some questions, like little assignments to work on. So I'll share the first two for this week, and you can reflect on them, and join me again next week, and we'll get the second two questions. So these first two will hopefully be relevant to what we talked about, today. I believe it is. So, okay. This week, observe the difference between nice and real. Notice situations where you were nice. What did the experience invoke in you? What were the results? And now, notice situations where you were real, so not necessarily trying to over-accommodate or people-please or sugarcoat because of your fear of not being accepted, or if somebody gets angry at you, it's really important to be able to stand up for ourselves and be truthful and authentic, and not front. Because she makes the point in this chapter, being real is trustworthy, whereas overcompensating or over-accommodating and agreeing to things that we don't really want to agree to causes us to really just lose our energy and get burned out, and then we can't genuinely give from a place of abundance and a place of love and nourishment within ourselves. Okay, so noticing being nice, noticing being real. In other words, noticing when you feel a yes in your body versus when you feel a no. And if you are in alignment with that, for example, if you feel a yes in your body, but you really mean no, but you still say, no. You feel a yes in your body, but you say no. Or you feel a no in your body, but you say yes, I think is the more common scenario where people are trying to please and overextend themselves. So, and it does take practice to feel into that within yourself. So just, again, noticing when, if somebody asks you a question, for example, if I ask you, do you want to eat a hamburger? You can feel that response. That's just one example, but you can feel that response within your body. If your body is telling you, no, I don't want to eat a hamburger because that will just make me feel bad, but maybe your mind is saying like, oh yeah, but hamburgers are so delicious, and oh, it's been a while since I had one, and it'll be okay, and it tastes so good. Just these stories that we tell ourselves. So noticing that feeling of our intuition, which resides in the body. We can feel it in the body. And observing the difference between being in alignment with that and ignoring it. So notice situations where you were nice. What did this experience invoke in you? What were the results? And then notice situations where you were real. So when you genuinely listen to that inner voice of intuition. What did this experience invoke in you? What were those results? From whom or what do you seek approval? Might be a hard one. Does this affect whether you act from your niceness or your realness? So noticing in your interactions with specific people or specific situations where you feel safe to be real and open, and where you feel unsafe and end up being nice in order to uphold some kind of image or protect yourself in a way. And instead of deflecting that onto the situation or the specific person, try to turn it around and bring it to yourself. Like, okay, I feel a certain way in this interaction with someone else, and it's not necessarily their fault, but I'm observing within myself how I feel about it, and now I'm going to further discover what it is about that situation that is bringing up this feeling in me. So it's trying to stay out of blame, because you'll notice the more and more you do this, that there are patterns that come up. So it's not necessarily a specific person if the same thing is happening over and over again with multiple people. That's showing that there's a trigger of some kind of pain within you, or a pattern within you. And then the next little assignment is spend this entire week in self-expression. Make movement toward the external world with your internal hopes and dreams. Act on life-giving opportunities despite the consequences. Observe what happens in you. Observe how others react. If you find yourself in self-indulgence, ask yourself, what am I not expressing? So the self-indulgence being like, oh, well, I can't do this because of that, and you know, there are just so many reasons, so many like potential consequences, bad things could happen. You know, again, these stories that we tell ourselves that may or may not be true, but the whole point is that we're telling ourselves these stories to keep ourselves small or in a box in order to avoid growing and getting out of our comfort zone. So self-express without worrying what other people may think or say. Just be you. Find what feels most alive for you, what makes you feel so vibrant and alive and in love with your life. Act on life-giving opportunities despite the consequences, and observe what happens in you. Observe how others react. If you find yourself in self-indulgence, ask yourself, what am I not expressing? Okay, y'all. So thanks for tuning in. I'm just gonna plug a few things. If you have enjoyed this video, again, you can find all the previous ones on YouTube and Facebook. And if you'd actually like to go deeper with me into yoga philosophy, I would love to have you over on my Patreon community. We talk a lot about yoga philosophy. I actually do a whole series about the 8 limbs of yoga. So the Yamas and Niyamas are the first 2 of the 8 limbs of yoga. The other limbs include the pranayama, which are the breathing practices, the asana, which are the yoga poses. So if you've ever gone to a yoga class in a yoga studio in the West, more than likely it was a asana class. The poses or postures. Poses, posture. So those are all other limbs of yoga, and right now we're working on the first 2 limbs of yoga, which are a big part of yoga philosophy, the Yamas and Niyamas. So I will put the link for my Patreon page in the description box. And we don't just talk about yoga philosophy, I also share about healthy recipes on there. I talk a lot about Ayurveda. I am in training right now to become an Ayurvedic chef, so I share a lot about that. I just posted a yummy cacao recipe to make some drinking cacao. So yeah, it's just $3.33 per month. And you can get lots of benefits like exclusive access to this content that I create just for my patrons. We also have such a beautiful community of people over there. I truly love every single one of my patrons. They're all just like badass entrepreneur, like super creative, amazing spiritual folks. Yeah, again, if this resonated for you, I really ask and encourage you to share as much as you like, tag someone who you feel could benefit from this wisdom. yeah, just subscribe, share, like, whatever, comment. And then the last thing I want to talk about is my coloring book. So I also recently published this. It's called Creatures of the Earth. It's a hand-drawn, trippy coloring book for all ages, and it is inspired by my travels, both nationally within the US and international travels. If you'd like to support my artwork, I have an art page which I'll link. It's Paysdays Artwork on Facebook, Instagram at Paysdays, and you can grab a copy of these. It's $15 to $25 sliding scale plus $5 shipping if you want to grab one of those. And one last time I'll show the book, The Yamas and Niyamas, Exploring Yoga's Ethical Practice by Deborah Adele. So thank you all so much for tuning in today, sending you so much love and blessings wherever you are. I hope that you can take this wisdom out into your day and into your week with you. And I will see you next Tuesday. So much love.